We do have a couple kind of off-season items to go through here. It's I mean, frankly, it's the beginning of May, which means we are 4.5 months past the season, and we are 3 months until the season. So, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, news is kind of dry right now. Now, for Iowa State fans in particular, this is a nice little change of pace. The last couple off seasons being fairly quiet are a nice change of pace from the 2021 and 2022 off seasons. 2021 when you had the um, potential just catastrophic implosion of the Big 12 as the Big 10 was grabbing Oregon and Washington and Texas and Oklahoma leave for the SEC. Um, and you thought that was going to be a whole deal. And you thought, well, holy crap, we might need to find a place to land, or we might end up at a G5 conference. And then the next season with the whole gambling thing, which was just, all right, I guess gambling was 23 now. I guess it was 2 years ago. But, having that for that off season, just really, really awful there. So it's been nice having two relatively quiet off seasons so far. Now, granted, the quietness of the offseason is a little bit relative considering we're still waiting on the house settlement as far as figuring out if we're going down to 105 players or if we're going to 110 or whatever it is. And our walk-on's going to be a thing. That's still up in the air. And actually, interesting enough on that point, I wasn't really originally intending to talk about this too much, but there was a quote by Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State's coach, this past week, talking about how their strategy basically has been talking to their walk-ons that they have in the program right now, saying, "Hey, if this goes to 105 and they don't allow walk-ons, I won't have a place for you. So if you want to hop in the transfer portal now, right away after spring practice and beginning of summer workouts, more power to you, because I can't guarantee that I can give you a roster spot in August. And I'd rather tell you now rather than try to hold out till August and then, kind of get caught with your pants down. And you have to start cutting guys when they just don't have time to go find another home before the season. So I like that approach from Kenny Dillingham. I think there's probably a lot of coaches that are taking that approach, even if they're not being like public about it. I wouldn't be shocked if Matt Campbell has at least had that discussion with some of the walk-ons and stuff like that. And I think most coaches will take that approach because I think they just understand that they just there's just so much about their teams that are it's still up in the air, and that frankly they just don't have a lot of control over. So it's kind of it's a difficult situation for them to be in, but we're still waiting to hear exactly what's going to happen with that. But a few big points of news to talk about. The first one is that following the NFL draft, which Iowa State had a few different wide receivers selected, and they had Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel both go to the Texans, Darren Porter to the Ravens. The big news here is that Jaden Higgins has agreed to a fully guaranteed 4-year, $11 million contract, $11.7 million contract, it's not like an astronomical amount of money or anything. That's good money, but it's not an astronomical amount of money. What's important here, though, is the last sentence there. He is the first second-round pick in NFL history to have a fully guaranteed contract. That is a big deal. I think the NFL is, in general, starting to move that direction to having more and more fully guaranteed contracts. But, offering a second-round receiver, the first fully guaranteed contract for a second-round pick in NFL history, I think speaks volumes as to what the Texans believe they can get out of Jaden Higgins. And frankly, I think that applies to the entire trio of Iowa State receivers, Xavier Hutchinson, Jaden Higgins, and Jalen Noel. I think that speaks volumes for what who Jaden is as a player and what they think of Iowa State as a program too, because they know, he's coming in with a big body, but Hakeem Butler came out with a big body and, a lot of really good, had some really interesting tape and stuff like that. But, he slipped down in the draft just a little bit and then, never really hung on with the Cardinals and has kind of bounced around a little bit. Now he's been putting him, getting the most snaps in like the UFL, or what before was the USFL with the St. Louis Battlehawks, and it seems to be kind of like the first guy out of the league most of the times. But Jaden Higgins, coming in, he gets taken in the second round, and now he has a fully guaranteed contract. That's such a big deal. Um, it gives him. I mean, that guarantees his spot in the NFL for 4 years, essentially. Because I mean, you're not going to cut out a player that's a guaranteed contract unless you absolutely have to. Um, I don't have any I don't have any reason to believe that he wouldn't, not only make the roster, but have a pretty good shot at cracking the starting, the first couple spots in the rotation and being essentially a starter, pretty early on. But this guarantees that he's going to get every shot possible to be successful in the league. And if he can be there and do his thing, and X and Jalen Noel can be there too. Gosh, it'd be such a great thing, not only for those guys, obviously, but just for I would say it's legacy in the NFL, because you remember for a long time that Iowa State didn't have any sort of legacy of putting players in the NFL. Um, it was not long ago where we were just looking for, you know, we were looking for Alvin Bowen to make a couple tackles on the Bills, or Tuba Rubin to get some special team snaps on the Browns. And now you're looking at guys that are not only playing every weekend, not only getting a few snaps every weekend, but they are bona fide stars in the NFL. And that's such a huge thing for the program going forward. I've seen multiple quotes about how Iowa State is kind of a destination for scouts at this point. Um, for NFL scouts, is it the same way as like Georgia and Alabama is, where it's just a must, where you can't not stop there? I don't know about that, but it is I would say it is absolutely a school now that is on every NFL team's radar. Is like, this school cranks out good players, and this is a reflection of that, of the hard work that Jaden has put in, and the hard work that Matt Campbell and everybody else at Iowa State have put in. It's a great sign. So congratulations there to Jaden Higgins. Really exciting for him. The next piece of news here, really just kind of a very brief thing, is that the kickoff time has been announced for the game in Ireland, and that one is going to kick off at 11 a.m. Central Time, which means it'll be 5 p.m. in Dublin. They're 6 hours ahead from the Central Time zone, so that's pretty cool. It's just, like I said, we're 2.5, 3 months out from being from this game kicking off, but it's getting closer. Summer goes by fast. We're getting there. This is nice that we're getting the first real news of the 2025 season that makes it feel like it's coming, and that we're getting close. 5 p.m. is a great time for this game, because you have plenty of time before and after. If this was like an 8 o'clock p.m. local kickoff or something like that, the game's getting done at 11:30, midnight, something like that. Probably closer to 11:30. After that point, we're still going to go out and hang out. I mean, the bars don't close at 2 a.m. like they do in the United States. But you're tired. You've probably had a long day of drinking. You're probably going to go back, especially if you're on the losing side. But this gives you plenty of time to stay out afterwards and have a good time. But 5 p.m. is also a long time throughout that whole day for Iowa State and Kansas State fans to drink some Irish beer out there. So it'll be a good time. I will be there. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I think there's a couple other guys from my outfit, Wide Right Natty Light, going out there. But I know for sure I will be out there. So if any Cyclone fans watching, or Kansas State fans watching out there, are going to be in Ireland, we'll see if we can find people and hang out and have a beer. So next order of business here is actually basketball related. We did get kind of an interesting news piece here from Jeff Goodman, who's obviously a big time college basketball insider, that we are going to be seeing a matchup this November between Iowa State and Mississippi State up at the Pentagon in Sioux Falls. So that's a big matchup. Mississippi State was a very good team last year. I don't I don't love this. I realize he's trying to be complimentary. I don't love Jeff Goodman taking swings at Iowa State's non-con schedule again. Um, so, but nonetheless, especially because the non-con schedule last year was really, really good, and this is a thing from 2 years ago, which that's kind of annoying. But either way, I would say getting a good matchup there in the non-conference, so they've got a pretty good slate already lined up, and we'll continue to see more matchups show up as we get closer to the season. But we've got a long time to go before we get to that particular sports season. But thought it was worthwhile to share. So, as I mentioned, there's this offseason being quiet is such a big thing for Iowa State. Obviously, getting past the gambling thing, all this, but the one of the things that is kind of looming over, we talked about it a little bit, is what these teams are going to do with their rosters, depending on how this house settlement comes down. And it's such a difficult situation because they just don't know what's going on. They have no control over what's happening. And unfortunately, the people in control is the federal government. And now this show is and always will remain completely apolitical. We're not, this is not even remote. That's not even remotely in your opinion of various politicians is of not in the purview of this show. But regardless of that, the idea of leaving college football in the hands of our federally elected officials is a bit worrying. It's not, that's not the type of people that you want to be in charge of this type of thing. One, they've got a lot of other things to go, they've got a lot of other things to be doing. Two, they're also just, they may be fans. A lot of them are, and one of them is a former coach. But for the most part, these are not people that are uh, deeply embedded in college football and in the business of it and how everything works. They have an interest in looking at like labor laws and like who can be working, without compensation, who needs to be compensated, things like that. They can weigh in on who is and is not considered an employee. But as far as the problem though is that even if they weigh in on that or they've got an opinion on that, they don't understand how those actions and how those rulings affect affect everything beyond that. They aren't really well equipped to understand the domino effect involved with this kind of decision, because you already have such an issue with players entering the transfer portal and just frankly just straight up not finding a place, just not finding a team to land at. And even if they find, they may go in and they may not find a team, but they also may not have a team to come back to. They may like they just like the team that they left or that they were previously a part of. Um, they may have already filled that spot behind them, and frankly at this point they probably have, because there's so many people in the portal and rosters are overturning so quickly that you have this huge problem. Now, hopefully some of this settles down when you get revenue sharing involved and all this, where it kicks in. Is it July 1st or July 7th or something like that when the revenue sharing kicks in? Hopefully a lot of that slows things down a little bit. But it goes beyond just that too, because then you have people losing scholarships because of roster. Now rosters are getting cut down, so people are losing scholarships and people are losing opportunities to play college sports. And all of this would be based on the decision by federally elected officials and district and Supreme Court judges, potentially, that these people don't really understand how college football works, and that is a massive issue. It's becoming a bigger problem as we go along, because their changes would immediately affect what happens this season as far as roster sizes go. But we also don't know, does the roster need to be cut down by the beginning of camp? Does it need to be cut down by first game of the season? What's the roster supposed to look like? who's allowed to have a scholarship, who isn't, and like are you allowed to have walk-ons? Are walk-on programs going to be just a thing of the past? Which would I think would be really unfortunate, because there's just so many good players that have gotten their starts as walk-ons. But we don't know what any of this looks like, and we're running out of time. These rosters need to be. I mean, ideally, if you're especially a Power Four college football coach, ideally you are not adding anybody more to your roster between now and kickoff. You know, you might find somebody if all of a sudden there's a big like a long term injury or something like that happens. Someone tears their ACL during summer workouts or something like that. Then sure, you might try to dip in the transfer portal, but you know, at this point in time, barring kind of unusual circumstances, your roster is not going to get any bigger from here on out. You've got the guys you've got. Now you're still going to have to make cuts. Guys are still going to hit the portal, all that. But, you know, you want to be done adding to your roster at this point so you can get them in for summer workouts. You can get them ingrained in the program. You can get them in strength conditioning and the nutrition program, and you can start, incorporating them into your team so they can be effective players, come for Iowa State, come August 23rd. And there's just not enough time right now. The longer this drags on, the more problems it's going to cause. And if they get to the point where they haven't decided this thing until we're into June or something like that, maybe even July, then you need to start talking about this thing doesn't whatever new restrictions apply can't kick in until 2026, because if all of a sudden in July you decide that everyone's got to just cut down to 105. That's just what it is. You got to cut probably 15, 20, 30 guys off your roster just at the drop of a hat. And you've got a month to figure it out. That is not enough time. It's just not. Now, absolutely, this could happen. It absolutely could happen. Because like I said, the federally elected officials do not understand how any of this works. They don't care that, that fall camp starts the last week of July or the first week of August or whatever. They don't care. They don't care about the timeline. They don't care about rosters. They don't care about student athletes. They don't care. They don't care about the well-being of the student athletes and their ability to continue to play, to play in the college athletics. They don't care about any of that. But they're going to still do something with it. And the longer they wait, the more problems it's going to cause. And that it sucks. And unfortunately, that is like the big overarching thing looming over college football right now. And there's no news. There's no movement on it. Nothing. We're just sitting on it. Which sucks. But if you're Iowa State, if something like that's essentially largely completely out of your control happens, if that's the worst thing that happens to you this summer, then it's great. Dixier's got a great point. Like, we've got bigger issues in our country. Why are they worried about how many people are on a field together? Well, they wouldn't specifically be passing any sort of like settlement saying, oh, roster limits have to be this. They're deciding on who's an employee, who's not, who can, do you have to have a scholarship to be on the to be on the roster? It's that kind of stuff. And then the domino effect of that legislation would get us theoretically to new roster limits. They're not going to, they're not passing a law to limit roster sizes just to do that. It's more of a downstream effect of all of the other, labor related legislation that they are, labor and compensation, legislation that they are currently debating on, or, interpretations of existing existing legislation. This is, such a, short and abbreviated summarization of what's happening. That you could talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours, and lots of people have, and lots of people that have done more of the deep down digging on this than I have. But it's an unfortunate situation for everybody involved that it never needed to get here. The decisions that were made that led us to here were not made last year. They weren't made 5 years ago. These are decisions that were made 20, 30, 40 years ago. Um, I know there's another Iowa State broadcaster, Chris Williams, over at Cyclone Fanatic, has talked about multiple times on his podcast about how the Rose Bowl is to blame for a lot of this, and they kind of are because they have um, their whole rules as far as protecting kickoffs and the sanctity of their bowl game and all this or whatever. But it's also Mark Emmert from the NCAA and their refusal to acknowledge that players should be getting paid and all this, and that's a whole thing. These decisions were made 40 years ago that have put us in this situation. It's not a new problem. This a lot of this could have been solved in the 80s and 90s when TV deals started really ratcheting up and started being worth a lot of money. It should have been addressed back then, and it wasn't. Now, because of that, we're in the situation we're in. It's tough, but it is what it is, and that's the biggest challenge I think facing. That's the biggest challenge by far facing college football programs this offseason. That is even beyond filling out their own rosters or whatever it is, because they just don't know what they're supposed to be at, and kids are going to lose their scholarships out of nowhere, and there's nothing they can do about it. And I know I probably sound like I'm rambling at this point, but it's such a complex topic that I don't think enough people are talking about, because I think the average fan doesn't think about, they say, okay, the roster size goes down to 105. That's just what it is, but the average fan is also not the person that has to really deal with the human side of those consequences. The roster that they see on their team's website is going to be a little bit shorter, and they might see a fewer, they'll see fewer guys on the sideline at home games. But other than that, that roster limit size doesn't change basically anything as far as the fan goes. Um, but gosh, I don't envy the coaches that have to go into their office and say, "Hey, you've been working your ass off, and you've put your body online and in physical harm, and in many cases have taken on significant injuries that are going to affect them for the rest of their lives. They've busted their ass. They've had essentially a full-time job alongside their studies. It's a massive undertaking. We know you've been busting your ass, but I don't have a scholarship available for you, and we can't keep walk-ons in the program now because some federally elected senator or representative or whoever this has decided arbitrarily that you are not allowed to be on the football team unless you have a scholarship." And that sucks. I that like Having to tell that to a player, to a 19 or 20-year-old kid that's been busting his ass, for the last couple years or whatever it is, that sucks. Because even at walk-ons and stuff like that, coaches see these guys as their kids, basically. I should say, let me rephrase that. A lot of coaches do. Many good coaches see these players functionally as maybe not their kids, but like, the closest thing to it, taking care of them like they are, their parent essentially, looking out for them, not just on the field, not just in a classroom, but who they are as people. And there's lots of guys that come in, and they come in with maybe academic issues or whatever it is, and they work their ass off, and they to try to um, not just be successful in the field, not just make it into the depth chart, but to improve who they are as human beings and to be more successful after college football. The being successful in something other than athletics, or something other than sports, the classic NCAA tagline. They're trying to do that, but now because the NCAA did nothing about player compensation or figuring out how to make sure that athletes are being compensated, fairly for their time, whatever that exactly looks like. Their lack of ability to come to with a solution for that, or even propose one, has got us into this situation in the first place. But it's a long, complicated road. that there is not a solution in sight to anytime soon that anyone's going to be happy with.